Russia has issued a strong condemnation of the United States over a series of recent strikes targeting boats from Venezuela. The vessels, according to Washington, were believed to be transporting narcotics through the Caribbean. Moscow, however, says the actions were taken without international authorization, calling them a violation of international law and the sovereignty of Venezuela, a longtime Russian ally in Latin America. The remarks came from Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov during a formal briefing in Moscow on the 11th of November 2025. His tone was measured but firm as he accused the US of acting beyond any legal framework. Lavrov stated that the US operations were conducted under the false pretext of fighting drug trafficking and that they represent a pattern of unilateral behavior increasingly common in American foreign policy. In his statement, Lavrov emphasized the lack of judicial process or evidence in these operations. Under the pretext of fighting drug trafficking, they are destroying boats, which they claim are carrying drugs, without any trial or investigation. And not just without a trial, but without presenting any facts to anyone, he said. He continued, "This is how, in general, lawless countries act, as well as those who consider themselves above the law." Lavrov's comments followed reports of multiple maritime strikes in the Caribbean, in which US forces destroyed or intercepted vessels said to be linked to Venezuelan drug networks. American officials have defended the actions as part of a larger counter-narcotics effort. They claim the strikes targeted vessels operating outside legal shipping lanes and that intelligence indicated their involvement in drug smuggling. However, Moscow argues that these operations took place in international waters and without oversight from the United Nations or regional authorities. The Russian Foreign Ministry has portrayed the US strikes as part of a broader trend of unilateral military intervention. Officials in Moscow say that such actions undermine international stability and erode mechanisms designed to ensure state sovereignty and due process. Russia has consistently supported Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's government, providing political, military and economic backing amid Western sanctions. The ministry's statement reiterates Moscow's position that any anti-narcotics operations should be coordinated through multilateral frameworks, such as the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime or regional security organizations. Lavrov said that Washington's decision to act unilaterally reflects a disregard for international cooperation and sets a dangerous precedent. He added that Russia will raise the matter in upcoming meetings at the United Nations and regional blocs, where Venezuela is a member, arguing that the strikes constitute a violation of both Venezuelan sovereignty and maritime law. The Venezuelan government has not publicly detailed the extent of the damage, but has echoed Moscow's view, describing the US actions as an aggression against the nation's territorial integrity. Caracas maintains that the United States has long used allegations of narcotics trafficking to justify pressure on governments opposed to its policies in Latin America. The US Department of Defense, for its part, has insisted that the maritime operations fall under existing regional security mandates aimed at countering transnational organized crime. US Southern Command, which oversees military operations in the Caribbean and Latin America, said in a brief statement that the intercepted vessels were operating without authorization and consistent with known trafficking patterns. The Pentagon declined to disclose specific details about the number of boats targeted or the nature of the intelligence that led to the strikes. According to security sources familiar with the operations, the US has increased its patrols in Caribbean waters over recent months, particularly near Venezuelan and Colombian coastlines. The move comes amid renewed efforts by Washington to curb narcotics flows from South America, which it says have resurged since 2024. Lavrov's remarks highlight a widening rift between Russia and the United States that extends beyond Europe and into Latin America. Moscow views US involvement in the region as an attempt to weaken Russia's strategic partnerships and economic influence. Over the past decade, Russia has cultivated deep ties with Venezuela through arms sales, oil ventures, and financial assistance. The Russian Foreign Ministry said the strikes were not only provocative but reckless, accusing the US of destabilizing a region that has struggled with economic and political crises. Moscow's statement argued that Washington is selectively applying the rules of international law to justify military actions against governments it opposes, while ignoring due process when it acts unilaterally. The dispute also reflects broader global tensions between major powers over the legitimacy of unilateral enforcement measures. Similar accusations have been leveled by Russia in other contexts, including Syria, Iraq and Ukraine, where Moscow accuses the West of violating sovereignty under the pretext of humanitarian or security concerns. The US justification for its operations rests on long-standing claims that Venezuelan security forces and senior officials are complicit in narcotics trafficking. Washington has accused figures within the Venezuelan government, including members of the armed forces, of facilitating cocaine shipments through national ports and air routes. Those allegations have been strongly denied by Caracas, which calls them part of a campaign to undermine the government. Lavrov's criticism adds weight to Venezuela's position, portraying the US actions as a cover for broader geopolitical objectives. He argued that operations conducted without transparent evidence cannot be distinguished from acts of piracy. The Russian diplomat noted that no international body had been presented with verifiable proof linking the destroyed vessels to narcotics smuggling. Analysts in Moscow suggest that Lavrov's comments are intended not only to defend Venezuela, but also to reinforce Russia's image as a defender of international law against what it sees as American unilateralism. The US strikes have drawn mixed reactions across Latin America. Some regional governments have avoided commenting publicly, while others, particularly members of the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America, have criticized Washington's actions. Cuba and Nicaragua issued brief statements supporting Venezuela's sovereignty and condemning foreign interference under any justification. Security experts warn that tensions in the Caribbean could increase if Washington continues maritime operations without regional coordination. The Caribbean basin remains a key corridor for transnational drug trafficking, and regional states depend heavily on cooperation between major powers to combat organized crime. Russia, through its expanding naval presence and joint training missions with Venezuela, has signaled that it will continue supporting Caracas in securing its territorial waters. Russian military vessels have made multiple port calls in Venezuelan harbors over the past 2 years, a move the United States has described as strategically concerning. The confrontation over the Venezuelan strikes fits into a broader pattern of friction between Washington and Moscow across multiple fronts, including Ukraine, Syria, and the Arctic. Each episode reinforces a growing sense of geopolitical competition between the two countries. Lavrov's remarks also come amid ongoing debates in Washington over the scope of US operations abroad and the balance between counter-narcotics enforcement and sovereignty concerns. Members of Congress have questioned whether such maritime strikes comply with international law, given that they occur without approval from regional governments or international bodies. In Moscow, officials are framing the incident as another example of what they describe as Western exceptionalism. Russian commentators argue that Washington's justification mirrors tactics used in previous interventions, citing alleged security threats without transparent evidence or multilateral oversight. Lavrov concluded his statement by urging international organizations to address what he termed a clear violation of fundamental principles. He said Russia would seek to place the issue on the agenda of upcoming United Nations discussions on international security and maritime law. The Russian foreign minister stated that Moscow supports cooperative efforts against drug trafficking, but insists that such operations must respect national sovereignty and legal procedures. He reiterated that unilateral actions risk inflaming regional instability and damaging the credibility of global anti-narcotics campaigns. The Russian Foreign Ministry's written summary of Lavrov's remarks further stated that Moscow expects the United States to provide a comprehensive explanation and evidence supporting its claims. So far, Washington has not responded publicly to these demands. The dispute over US Strikes on Venezuelan vessels has now evolved into a larger diplomatic confrontation between two major powers, one that combines questions of legality, sovereignty, and strategic influence in the Western Hemisphere. Russia maintains that the United States acted outside international law, destroying vessels on unverified suspicions and without presenting evidence. The United States, meanwhile, insists that its actions are part of a legitimate global fight against drug trafficking. Both sides remain entrenched, and no independent investigation has yet been launched to determine the facts surrounding the incident. The controversy underscores the fragile state of US-Russia relations and highlights how their rivalry increasingly extends far beyond Europe, reaching into Latin America's contested maritime zones. For now, the diplomatic fallout continues, with Moscow warning that Washington's actions risk destabilizing an entire region already struggling with political divisions and economic hardship. Russia's position remains clear. The US strikes were unacceptable, unlawful, and conducted under false pretenses. The United States stands by its justification. As of today, no international forum has confirmed the legality of the US operations, and neither side appears willing to compromise. The standoff over Venezuela's waters has become another flashpoint in the long and complex struggle between Moscow and Washington, a dispute that now stretches from the Caribbean to the corridors of the United Nations.